You know, live-action adaptations are pretty weird. On one hand, there's something to be said about retelling old stories in a new medium, about breathing new life into old classics, or turning the written word into something tangible. In those cases, the adaptations seem almost self-explanatory. Who doesn't want to see Aragorn kick ass on the big screen? Who doesn't want to see the magic of Hogwarts firsthand? But what about cases where the value of an adaptation is less obvious? What about cases where the original is already the epitome of the medium? Those are the questions that were floating through our minds as we watch Netflix's highly anticipated Avatar the Last Airbender, a show with the enormous burden of following up what is widely regarded to be one of the best animated series of all time. A feat that has been attempted only once before, to pretty disappointing results. With Shyamalan's failure still fresh in the collective memory of the fanbase, the question on everyone's mind was whether this new series would be a repeat of the disastrous movie that shall not be named, or whether it would stick the landing and bring something new and relevant to the Avatar mythos. But what if I told you that it's none of the above? That Netflix's Avatar is neither good enough to be called a success, nor bad enough to be memorable as a failure? That in the grand scheme of things, all it really is forgettable.
So what I told you was true. From a certain point of view.
Let's get one thing straight. Netflix's Avatar could be worse. It has decent visuals, a likable if largely inexperienced cast, and it at least attempts to faithfully follow in the steps of the original. But the problem with this show is that it's difficult to imagine a world in which anyone would want to watch it over the animated series. The bottom line is that while this show is not as bad as its movie counterpart, it's still a long way from being good, and this puts it in a bizarre position as a piece of media that is redundant upon arrival. Because in nearly every fashion, this adaptation provided a calorie-light version of the characters and narrative of the original.
For starters, this show has a real problem with exposition, as in there's way too much of it. You know how show don't tell is one of the basic rules of filmmaking? Well, the live-action adaptation kinda just forgets about that. In the first episode alone, they beat us over the head with not one, not two, but 3 variations of the original opening monologue.
By the Avatar, the one person with the ability to master all 4
Only the
elements
Avatar,
and protect
the one
the
person
delicate
who
balance.
can
the
master
Avatar.
all 4 elements.
Master of
Only the
all.
Avatar.
Only the Avatar.
By the Avatar.
And it's even worse when we get scenes like this one, where characters just tell us exactly what they're feeling.
I like to play airball and eat banana cakes and goof off with my friends. I don't want the responsibility. I'm scared of my power. I'm scared of being alone.
In terms of characterization, Aang, Katara, and Sokka feel shallow and muted compared to their animated counterparts. While Gordon Cormier largely succeeds in channeling Aang's cheery, amicable nature, he does little to show other facets of the character, leaving Aang decidedly one note in terms of personality. Sokka and Katara have similar issues, with Sokka losing much of his humor and Katara missing most of her original spirit.
Sure, there's something to be said about lackluster performances from the child actors, but honestly, most of the characterization problems fall on the writing, because the live action takes extensive liberties with some of the core aspects of the main trio's character arcs, not truly understanding what made them work in the first place. Sokka no longer has to humble himself to become a better person. Aang no longer has to contend with his guilt for leaving his people. And Katara, well, she's robbed of any trace of her former ferocity and moral conviction. Just take a look at how much weaker live-action Katara seems in comparison to the original when confronting Paku's sexism.
Women aren't allowed in combat. I thought you knew.
No, I didn't. I wouldn't have accepted it if I did. It's stupid and it's wrong.
I'm waiting, little girl.
No! No way am I apologizing to a sour old man like you!
Tara?
I'll be outside if you're man enough to fight me.
The pacing of the series is another significant misstep. The original series was praised for its balance of action, humor, and heartfelt moments. However, this adaptation rushes through key plot points, sacrificing crucial character development and world building in the process. Episode 3, for example, combines Jet's plotline with that of Omashu and the Northern Air Temple, with bits of Zuko and Iroh's infiltration of the Earth Kingdom sprinkled in. The result is an episode that feels bloated. A lot happens in terms of plot development, but our attention is spread far too thin across various characters to really feel like any of them got their due. Even worse, in the effort to cram in as many plot lines as possible from the original show, the live action often loses the context that made these stories work in the first place. In this way, scenes from the original that once carried emotional weight lose much of their impact. Sokka and Katara's argument over Jet, for instance, is severely hampered by the fact that Sokka is almost entirely absent from the Jet storyline. Likewise, the inclusion of the Cave of Two Lovers just feels completely out of place with Sokka being there instead of Aang. In the end, although the live action makes an admirable attempt to include as much content as it can, there's a real sense that it stumbles as it combines these different threads. As individual episodes, these stories had room to breathe and leave an impact on the audience, but as subplots in a larger episode, they just feel like abridged versions of the originals with half the weight behind them. Combine that with the poor character writing, the overuse of CGI, and action scenes that were always doomed to look mediocre compared to the fluidity of the cartoon, and you have a show that really struggles to justify its existence.
To be honest, we considered breaking down every flaw of this adaptation. We considered making a long-form essay analyzing how it pales in comparison to the animated show, how the characters are lessened by unnecessary changes, like how the live-action series doesn't have Aang running away from the air temple, or how it omits the scene where Zuko saves his crew from the storm. But it simply didn't seem worth it.
And the reviews largely seem to agree. Everywhere we look, the same sentiment is being shared. That this show is not terrible, but it's not great either. That it's passable, that it's good enough. If this show were a student, it would be pulling straight C's all the way to college. Now, we love all things Avatar, and admittedly, there was some joy in seeing these characters on screen again. But that alone is not enough. We really can't help but think that 10 years from now, this show is barely going to be a footnote in the greater Avatar universe, below even M. Night Shyamalan's movie, which has at least provided everyone with a lifetime of memes. If you like the show, we are happy for you. Really, we're not here to try and tell you you shouldn't. But for our money, as it stands, Netflix's live-action remake is a largely forgettable entry in an otherwise unforgettable franchise.
You said it.
But the effects were decent.